The scent of jasmine floated through the morning air as Maribel cinched the final row of buttons on the bridal gown. Her fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from exhaustion. The dress she held in her hands wasn't hers. It belonged to Clara Harrington, the daughter of the elite Harrington family and today's bride. Maribel Santos, 24, wasn't a guest. She wasn't family. She was the help. The Harringtons had hired her 6 months ago, after her mother's illness forced her to drop out of university. Once a top student in architecture, Maribel now scrubbed champagne flutes and pressed linens, all to keep her family's crumbling home from being repossessed. Her younger brother, Luca, only 10, still believed she was taking a break to figure out her dreams. He didn't know she cried herself to sleep every night after working double shifts and eating leftover food from the events she served at. Today was supposed to be like any other, just another rich girl's wedding in an extravagant garden tent big enough to host a music festival. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Maribel stood in the ornate dressing room of the estate, finishing up last-minute preparations, Clara stormed in with her veil clenched in her fists and mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I can't do this! I can't! I won't marry him!" Clara cried, pacing like a trapped animal. "They don't care what I want, they just want a merger. A billion-dollar merger sealed with a white dress and a fake kiss." Maribel flinched. She'd only caught glimpses of the groom on the tabloids, a reclusive tech billionaire named Elias Thorne. Known for founding Synex, the AI conglomerate that had revolutionized global communication, Elias was rarely seen in public. He was rumored to be brilliant, private, and haunted by a tragic past. No one really knew him, not even Clara, apparently. "I'm running away," Clara declared, grabbing a satchel and stuffing in a pair of sneakers. "I'll fake a breakdown, flee to Paris. They'll think I snapped, and no one will chase me." Maribel stared, stunned. "You can't just leave. The guests are arriving. The media is here. Your mother will lose her mind." "I don't care," Clara snapped. "Let them all burn." And then Clara paused. Her mascara-ringed eyes scanned Maribel, her dark brown hair, her petite frame, her warm brown eyes filled with alarm. "You're close to my size," Clara whispered. "Put on the dress." "What?" Maribel gasped. "Just put it on. Say I fainted, say I'm drugged, say whatever. It'll buy me time to disappear." Maribel froze. "Clara, this is insane." "You owe me," Clara hissed. "You think I don't know about your mother's treatment bills? My mother wanted to fire you last month. I convinced her not to." The words hit like a slap. Maribel's knees buckled slightly, torn between duty and panic. "I'll be gone in 20 minutes, Clara whispered. "Please, just stand there. Pretend." A silence fell. Maribel looked at the satin dress hanging by the window, glowing in the sunlight like it belonged to another universe. And before she could argue further, Clara vanished out the side door, leaving her standing there, alone, with a wedding dress, a secret, and a life-altering decision to make. The next 10 minutes would define everything. Maribel's breath shook as she changed into the gown. The bodice hugged her body like a second skin, the veil trembling in her fingers as she secured it. Her worn-out sneakers peeked from under the hem as she shuffled to the mirror. Her reflection startled her, a girl who looked nothing like the Maid she knew. For a moment, she saw grace, beauty, and a kind of aching innocence. There was a knock. "Miss Harrington," a voice called. "It's time." Her heart pounded like a war drum. "Don't speak," she reminded herself. "Just nod, stay quiet, buy Clara the time." With trembling steps, she followed the wedding coordinator down the hallway. The estate shimmered with golden florals, twinkling chandeliers, and rows of guests whispering behind designer sunglasses. She clutched her bouquet like a lifeline, willing her heartbeat to slow. The music began. And at the end of the aisle, framed by a cascade of orchids, stood Elias Thorne. He was taller than she expected. Broad-shouldered, dressed in a custom-tailored suit, dark hair slightly tousled, his steel-gray eyes searched her face behind the veil with an unreadable expression. Not love, not anger, something deeper. Like he was trying to memorize her. Maribel didn't dare speak. Her heart was trying to break through her ribs. They reached the altar. The vows began. Then something strange happened. Elias stepped forward, gently lifting her veil. Their eyes met. A pause. Then, the faintest furrow of his brow, a flicker of confusion. Recognition? No, impossible. Still, he said nothing. Instead, he leaned in and whispered for only her to hear. "You're not Clara." Maribel's blood ran cold.
Maribel froze. Her pulse stuttered as Elias's whispered words echoed in her mind. "You're not Clara." How could he tell? She had barely spoken a word, hidden behind the veil, drowned in a gown she never dreamed of wearing. Still, he wasn't yelling, wasn't calling off the wedding. He simply stood there, staring, eyes calm but sharp, like a storm waiting to break. Maribel swallowed hard and forced a small, polite smile, the kind maids use when guests are being difficult. Maybe he was bluffing, maybe it was just nerves. If she didn't react, if she played along, he'd let it go. The officiant continued speaking, unaware of the silent war happening at the altar. Guests leaned in, mistaking the tension for romance. Cameras clicked, the whole world was watching, and Maribel's insides were unraveling thread by thread. Then came the moment she feared. "Do you, Elias Thorne, take Clara Harrington to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Elias looked at her, long and hard. "I do," he said, never breaking eye contact. A tremor ran through her. "And do you, Clara Harrington, take Elias Thorne?" Maribel's lips parted, but no words came. She glanced sideways. Security, paparazzi, Clara's mother beaming in the front row. Then she felt it, his hand brushing hers. Firm, calm. She looked back at Elias. He was still watching her, almost gently now. His voice low enough that only she could hear. Just say yes. It wasn't a demand, it was strange even. And in that moment, for reasons she couldn't explain, she trusted him. "I do," she whispered. The crowd erupted in applause. The cameras flashed brighter than the sun. They were married. And no one knew, not yet, that the bride was a maid and the real Clara Harrington was somewhere on a plane to Paris. The reception passed in a surreal blur. Maribel barely touched her food. Her lips hurt from fake smiles. Her palms ached from nervous handshakes. Elias stayed close, always within a few steps, watching her, not speaking much, but he never once addressed her as Clara again. They danced once, a slow waltz beneath a sea of twinkling fairy lights. "You handled the ceremony well," Elias said quietly. "I didn't have much choice," she replied. "Clara gave me 5 minutes' notice." So it was her plan. His tone carried no surprise. You knew?" Maribel asked, stunned. Elias offered a dry smile. "Clara's been trying to get out of this for weeks. I didn't think she'd have the nerve, but she's always been dramatic." "And yet you still said I do?" He twirled her gently. "Because you didn't run." Maribel blinked, heat rising in her cheeks. "I know who you are," Elias continued, softer now. "You work here. I saw you 6 months ago in the courtyard, helping an elderly gardener during a rainstorm. You got soaked. You weren't supposed to be on shift." She froze mid-step. "You remember that?" "I remember kindness. I also remember watching Clara berate that same man hours later for dirtying the walkway." The music slowed. Elias's voice grew more serious. "You don't owe me an explanation, but you should know. If you disappear before tomorrow morning, the media will say I was jilted at the altar by a maid pretending to be a billionaire's wife. The scandal would ruin both of us." "I didn't mean to deceive you," she whispered. "I believe you." They stopped dancing. "But now what?" she asked. "That's up to you." Later that night, in the honeymoon suite she never expected to see, Maribel sat on the edge of the bed in a borrowed silk robe. Her dress hung on the back of a chair like an abandoned dream. She stared at the flickering fireplace and tried not to cry. The door creaked. Elias entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He handed one to her without a word. They sat in silence,
the flickering flames casting long shadows across the room. "Why didn't you stop the wedding?" she finally asked. Elias leaned back. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do." "That's cold." "Maybe," he admitted, "but when I saw you walk down that aisle, terrified, shaking, clearly doing this for someone else, I saw more honesty in you than I ever saw in Clara." Maribel looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want this," she said. "I'm just a maid trying to keep my mother alive." "I know." She glanced up sharply. "How?" "I looked you up after the dance. I have resources. It didn't take long." She bit her lip. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elias added gently. "In fact, I want to offer you a deal." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of deal?" "We pretend, just for a few weeks. Publicly, you're Mrs. Thorne. Privately, you're my partner in damage control. No romance, no pressure. I'll help cover your mother's treatment costs. You help me maintain my public image until I can sort out the merger contracts tied to this marriage." Maribel's heart raced. "And after that?" "You walk away, debt-free, with your family taken care of. Or we renegotiate, depending on what happens." She stared at him, unsure whether to be offended, flattered, or terrified. "You're serious?" "Deadly." She sipped her cocoa, hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what kind of man you are," she whispered. "Then give me a chance to show you." In that quiet room, with the world still buzzing outside, Maribel made a choice. Not for greed, not for fame, but for her mother, for Luca, and for the strange, unreadable billionaire who had seen past the veil and still hadn't walked away. 3 weeks passed in a blur of headlines, staged photos, and whispered secrets. The billionaire's surprise bride. From Maid to Mrs. Thorne, who is she really? Clara Harrington's disappearance sparks wedding scandal. The world had questions. Elias gave none of the answers. Maribel played her part with careful restraint. She wore designer dresses selected by stylists who had no idea she once stitched up her school uniform by hand. She gave silent smiles to cameras while her knees wobbled beneath glittering heels. She posed beside Elias in curated moments, a hand on his arm here, a soft glance there. But behind the scenes, they barely touched. She stayed in the east wing of his penthouse suite. He worked late into the night, designing whatever top-secret project Sinex had buried beneath 10 layers of encryption. They were strangers bound by a lie. And yet, something was changing. It began with Luca. One morning, Elias appeared in the dining hall while Maribel was on a call with her brother. She hadn't heard him come in. Her voice had risen, full of warmth. "No, dummy, you don't add milk before the cereal, you'll make it soggy." She was barefoot, wrapped in a robe, legs curled under her. Her laugh was unguarded, real. Elias paused in the doorway. She saw him, startled. "Sorry," she said quickly, fumbling to hang up. "Didn't know you were up." But he only smiled. "Was that Luca? You know his name? You talk about him in your sleep." Her cheeks burned. From that day on, small things began to shift. One evening, Elias arrived with a rare smile and said, "Come with me." "To where?" "You'll see." They drove out of the city in his custom electric car, sleek, silent, and so smooth it felt like floating. Maribel had never ridden in anything more expensive than a used Toyota. The car pulled up to a modest, single-story brick house. The porch light flickered. She froze. "How do you know this place?" "I bought it," Elias said simply. "Paid off the debt, fixed the plumbing. It's your home now. Your mom's been moved to a private care clinic. Luca's school fees are covered." Her knees nearly gave out. "But why?" she whispered. Elias's expression softened. "Because I can. Because you deserve to breathe without drowning." Tears spilled before she could stop them. No one, not even the people she'd helped over the years, had ever helped her back. She hugged him. It was instinct, grateful, pure. And though he hesitated, he hugged her too. Not out of obligation, out of something gentler.
Over the next week, the walls between them continued to thin. He brought her coffee in the morning, always just the way she liked it. She left notes on his blueprints with ideas. He surprised her by actually using one of them. He found her humming a lullaby in the library one night. She didn't stop. He just sat nearby and listened. Still, neither dared speak the truth of what this was becoming. Until the gala. Sinex's annual charity gala was a galaxy of silk gowns, champagne towers, and power brokers. The media dubbed it the Billionaire's Ball. Elias arrived in black velvet. Maribel wore a midnight blue gown with a neckline that made even the coldest socialites stare. Her hair was pinned up with diamond combs, her lips painted like crushed berries. When she walked down the grand staircase at the venue, Elias looked up. And for the first time, he didn't just see the brave girl who filled in for a runaway bride. He saw the woman who had slipped into his life and changed it. He offered his arm. She took it without hesitation. And as they moved through the glittering crowd, people whispered, "They look in love."
Halfway through the evening, Maribel found herself alone on the balcony, needing air. That's when she heard them. Two women behind the curtain. That girl? Please, you think someone like Elias Thorne would actually fall for a maid? She's just the placeholder. Clara will come back. She always does. I bet she's still cleaning his floors when the cameras are off. Their laughter pierced the night like broken glass. Maribel turned to leave and nearly collided with Elias. His jaw was clenched, his hands in fists. "You heard them," she whispered, embarrassed. "I did," he said tightly, "and they're wrong." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maribel's heart stopped. "I wanted to wait for the right time, but—" He opened it. Inside was a sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. It shimmered like moonlight. "I know this began as a lie," he said, "but nothing about the way I look at you is pretend." Maribel trembled. "This isn't a proposal," Elias added. "Not yet. But it is a choice. To stay, to keep going, together, for real." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and unsure. "But what if Clara comes back?" Elias's voice turned low, final. "She had her chance. She left. I didn't choose her." His gaze burned into her. "I choose you." And for the first time in her life, Maribel Santos felt what it was like to be wanted. Not used, not pitied, chosen. The sapphire ring remained unopened in its velvet box, resting silently on Maribel's nightstand like a heartbeat waiting for an answer. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no. She had simply held Elias's gaze and whispered, "Let me think," because everything was changing, and fast. The charity gala had made headlines the next morning. The photo of Elias and Maribel, eyes locked, bathed in gold light, had gone viral. The public didn't see a maid pretending anymore. They saw something real. But real didn't mean safe. 3 days later, the storm hit. It began with a knock. Maribel opened the penthouse door and found herself face to face with Clara Harrington. Still wrapped in designer sunglasses, lips pouty and sharp, hair tousled in the deliberate way that screamed chaotic heiress, Clara looked like she had stepped out of a tabloid. Maribel stared, stunned. "You're back," she said quietly. Clara smirked. "Miss me?" Elias was already in the foyer when Clara strutted in like she owned the building. And once she might have, but this time Elias didn't step forward to greet her. He folded his arms. "Clara?" "You didn't tell me she moved in," Clara snapped, jerking her chin toward Maribel. "Or that you'd be flaunting her in public." Maribel stiffened. "I told you not to come back," Elias said, voice calm but steel-lined. "Oh, please," Clara said, plopping into a velvet chair like she hadn't abandoned her own wedding. "I went to Paris to clear my head. I had a panic attack. Do you blame me? You never even asked if I was okay. You left me at the altar. I didn't think you'd go through with it." "Well," Elias replied coldly, "you thought wrong." Clara's eyes darted to Maribel, narrowing.
I see you wasted no time replacing me with the help. Maribel opened her mouth, then closed it. She wouldn't lower herself, not today. I'm not here to fight, Clara said, rising, but I am here to make things right. Elias arched a brow. Meaning? The Harrington-Thorne merger? It's back on the table. My parents agree. I'll do the public rounds. I'll even pretend we're still engaged. Just dissolve this ridiculous facade. She said it with a flippant wave of her hand toward Maribel, like flicking away lint. Elias didn't speak, but Maribel saw the flicker in his jaw. Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. Be honest, Elias. You and I both know this thing with her isn't sustainable. You're a billionaire. She's a charity case. That was it. Before Elias could respond, Maribel stepped forward. Leave. Clara blinked. Excuse me? You don't get to insult me in my home. Your home? Clara laughed. But Maribel didn't flinch. Yes, mine. I live here now. Not because I tricked my way in, because he asked me to stay. Because I showed up when you ran. Clara's face darkened. I covered for you, Clara. I wore your dress. I stood at your altar. And I didn't do it for money or headlines. I did it because I thought you needed a way out. I gave you that. But you don't get to come back and spit in my face. For a moment, Clara said nothing. Then her smile vanished. You have no idea who you're dealing with. With that, she stormed out. The door slammed shut. Elias exhaled. I should have known she'd try to worm her way back in. She's not the only one who thinks I don't belong here, Maribel said softly. People are talking, calling me names. Social climber, imposter, gold digger. I don't care what they think. I care what you think. She looked at him, really looked. I'm scared, she admitted, of falling for something that was never mine. Elias stepped closer. You were never pretending to be her, Maribel, but she was pretending to be someone worthy of this life, of this partnership. You've done more with truth than she ever did with money. She bit her lip. And what if this all goes up in flames? He gently touched her cheek. Then we rise from the ashes, together.
But the fire was already lit. The next day, Clara made good on her threat. She went to the press. And not just with rumors, with evidence. Photos from the Harrington estate, one showing Maribel in her maid's uniform weeks before the wedding. Security footage of her entering the bride's room that morning. A video, grainy but damning, of Clara herself boarding a plane the day of the wedding. Clara spun it perfectly. I had a mental breakdown. I asked Maribel to call for help. Instead, she took my place and married Elias. I was too fragile to fight it then, but I'm stronger now, and I want my life back. The media exploded. Social feeds burned with hate. #FakeBride trended for 48 hours. And the board members at Sinex? They weren't thrilled. Elias was summoned to an emergency investor meeting. Rumors swirled that his marriage might void the trust clauses needed for the international merger. Stocks wavered. Shareholders threatened to pull out. Inside the penthouse, silence reigned. Maribel barely left her room. Until, one night, Elias knocked gently. Come with me. He drove her out of the city again, this time to a cliffside retreat with ocean wind and thunderous waves. A place he used when the noise got too loud. They sat on the rocks beneath the stars. She shivered, and he gave her his coat. Do you regret it? She asked, saying I do. He looked at her like the question offended him. No, never. But the company can rebuild. And your name means nothing if it isn't tied to truth. She stared out at the water. Then tell me the truth. He turned to her. I wanted a convenient marriage, a contract, a shield. That's what Clara was supposed to be. But you made me want more. You reminded me what it's like to feel again.
And I'm scared too, Maribel, because I don't know what this is becoming, but I want it." His voice cracked, just slightly. "And if I have to choose between the empire I built and the woman who walked into my life wearing another woman's gown but never once told a lie?" He paused. "I choose you, every time." She exhaled like a wave broke inside her. And for the first time in days, she smiled. But their hardest trial was still ahead, because Clara wasn't finished. And soon, Maribel would face a decision that no amount of love could make easy. One that would test the strength of what they'd built and the truth of what they meant to each other.
2 weeks after Clara's media ambush, Synec's board gave Elias an ultimatum: annul the marriage, clear the scandal, and the merger stays. Keep the girl and lose everything. Maribel overheard the call. She wasn't meant to, but she had wandered toward the office late that night with a tray of tea, hoping he'd rest. Instead, she heard the rage in Elias's voice, then the silence after he hung up, the kind of silence that sounded like surrender. She didn't say a word, just left the tea outside his door, and packed her bags the next morning. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. Because if she stayed, he would lose his company, his legacy, his life's work. And she couldn't be the reason he lost it all, especially not when he had been the first man to ever see her. Not just notice her, but see her. She went back to her old neighborhood, the crumbling street corner, the rusted mailbox, the peeling paint on her mother's bedroom door. Luca cried when he saw her. Her mother, stronger now, asked no questions, only offered her arms and a quiet place to land. The news exploded the next day. Maribel Santos has left Elias Thorne. And then, Clara Harrington and Elias Thorne, secret engagement resumes. The tabloids had a field day. But it was the photo that broke her. A leaked shot of Elias and Clara together at a gala. She was holding his arm again. She was smiling. Maribel felt the air leave her lungs. He moved on. Of course he did. This was always a temporary fairy tale. What did she expect? A maid in a borrowed dress doesn't become a queen. She simply returns to the shadows. A week later, the truth surfaced. Not in the form of a press conference, not through tabloids, but through a handwritten letter delivered by a driver she didn't recognize. It bore Elias's name. The envelope was unsealed. Inside was a single sheet, written in firm, precise script. "Maribel, you left without saying goodbye, so I'll say what you didn't give me the chance to. I never chose Clara. That photo was staged. She showed up at the board's emergency gala uninvited, grabbed my arm before the cameras flashed. I left 10 minutes later. I let the world believe what it wanted, because I was buying time. Time to clean up the mess you didn't make. Time to pull every string I could to prove the truth. They forced me to choose, you or the company. I chose you, and they took everything. But the moment they said I had to give you up to keep what I built, I knew what truly mattered. You weren't the lie, Maribel. You were the only truth I've ever known. If you never come back, I'll understand. But I hope you remember what I said on the cliffs. We rise from the ashes. Together. Always. E." Her hands shook. Tears blurred the ink. And then, behind the letter, something slipped free. A plane ticket, first class, one way, departing in 4 hours, to a place she didn't recognize. But the sender? Elias Thorne. She clutched the letter to her chest and ran. When she landed, the air smelled like sea salt and jasmine, warm, free. The car waiting for her had no driver, only a nameplate. For the woman who wore the dress but never wore the mask. It took her up winding cliffs until she saw it, the house from the photos. The one Elias had always dreamed of retiring in, the one he designed in college, his sanctuary. And there he was, standing at the edge of the veranda, hair tousled by wind, wearing the same nervous, crooked smile he'd worn the first time they danced. "You came," he said softly.
I always would, she replied. She stepped forward. He stepped closer. They met halfway. And for the first time, not in costume, not under pressure, not surrounded by flashing cameras, they kissed. It wasn't a firework. It was a sunrise. Slow, healing, true. Later, as they watched the tide roll in, Elias told her everything. How he'd shut down Clara's claims in court, how he'd released security footage showing Maribel being coerced by Clara, how public opinion had started to turn once he leaked the truth. "How did you keep fighting?" she asked. "Because I lost too much before," he said. "My mother, my sister, I let them down. I didn't fight hard enough for the people who mattered. I won't make that mistake again." "You didn't lose me," she whispered. "You left. Because I thought love meant letting go." He cupped her face gently. "Love means holding on, even when it hurts." She cried into his hands, and he kissed her again, this time like a promise. The sun dipped low over the sea, and in the golden hour light, Elias finally asked, "Stay, not as my cover, not as my business partner, as the woman I love." She smiled through tears. "Only if you stay too, not as the billionaire, not as the man trying to save the world, just as the man who saw me." He held her hand. "Deal."
1 year later. The world had changed. So had Maribel Santos. The headlines were different now. Former Maid marries tech billionaire, now leads his global foundation. Maribel Thorne's new initiative sends 100,000 girls to school. From Maid to Muse, a modern-day Cinderella who chose to give back. But none of that was why she smiled as she watched the morning sun filter through the trees of their cliffside home. She smiled because she had just placed a fresh-cut sunflower in a simple glass jar, next to a worn, handwritten blueprint for a shelter project she and Elias were building together in Brazil. Because outside, Luca was chasing butterflies in a garden he never dreamed of. Because her mother, strong now, sat on the porch with a cup of tea and the quiet contentment of a woman whose daughter had defied every statistic. Because Elias was humming in the kitchen, trying to make pancakes and burning half of them, but laughing like it was all part of the charm. And because somewhere, deep inside her, the girl who once hid behind a borrowed gown had finally taken off her armor and found she didn't need it anymore. Elias walked in wearing an apron that read, "King of Code, Lord of Batter." He kissed her on the cheek and whispered, "Board meeting in 20, but your opinion on these is more important." She took a bite, chewed, and gave him a deadpan look. "You made them with salt instead of sugar again, didn't you?" He winced. "One day, I'll get it right." "You're the only billionaire who can crack a blockchain but not a pancake recipe." "And yet," he said, pulling her into his arms, "you married me anyway." She laughed into his chest. "Yes, I did." Later that day, she stood on stage in front of thousands at the Global Philanthropy Summit. Her dress was emerald green, hand-sewn by a team of women artisans she personally supported. Her voice, once timid, rang clear across the auditorium. "I used to think worth came from titles, or money, or bloodlines," she said. "But I've learned that true worth comes from what we choose to do with the pain we survive." A pause. "I was a maid. I wore borrowed clothes. I was spoken over, overlooked, and forgotten." She looked out at the crowd, CEOs, world leaders, young women holding their breath. And then someone looked at me and didn't see a job title. He saw a person. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't shy away from it. "He gave me space to breathe, and that space allowed me to rise, not as his ornament, but as his equal. Not because he saved me, but because he stood beside me while I saved myself." The crowd erupted in applause. But it was the sight of Elias, standing at the back, clapping the loudest, eyes filled with tears, that made her knees weak. She stepped off stage and into his arms. "You did it," he whispered.
No, she said softly, we did. That night, they returned to the same clifftop where it all began. The same wind, the same stars. Only now, their hands bore matching wedding bands. He kissed her temple and said, "You changed my life." "You gave me back mine," she replied. They sat on the porch swing, a blanket over their laps, fireflies dancing in the distance. And in the quiet stillness, he asked her the question he'd asked once before, but this time with no secrets, no lies, no weight behind it. "Do you still want to stay?" She turned to him, smiled, and answered without hesitation, "With you, always." She was never just the girl who wore another's dress. She was the woman who wore her truth, stitch by stitch, scar by scar, until it became her crown.